Hi everybody. This little video is really about uh, drawing with brushes. Uh, what I mean by that really is that we very often, when we're painting, a lot of people still might draw out with pencil or charcoal, which is all fine, by the way. But when you draw with a brush, when you establish your marks with a brush, it changes everything. So we're going to look at that. It's something that people very often don't do, or maybe are anxious about doing. And just simple things like the difference. We're going to look at the difference between a brush that size, for instance. How do we draw with that compared to, let's say, how we draw with this one? I have some here. This rounded shape one. What does that do that this one doesn't do? This one here, which is flat. Also, it's very, very long compared to this little one there, this tiny little one, which is not only round but very, very thin at the top. This one's long, different physical sort of interaction with it. And things like this big, ugly, big brush that I've had kicking around for ages, and I still use. As you can see, it's rough, it's all out of shape, but it does interesting things, actually. So this is the sort of thing I would like us to think about in this video and in this session. So I'll get started now, talk you through some thoughts on this and see how that goes, okay?
Okay, so we've had a look at different shapes and sizes of brushes and so on. I've got a selection here. So what would be nice now to do is just think about what these brushes do. These sort of things are things we don't think about maybe enough when we're painting. I keep saying this, we just assume a brush is something that you put paint on with. Well, and it is that, but it's designed to make marks that are specific, that allow you to suggest things like trees or flowers or dogs or cats or whatever it is, which is why there are all these different shapes. They're not these different shapes just by chance. There's a reason over the many hundreds of years that that's happened. So what I'm going to do here is just take some of these brushes and just reinforce in a way what we already know, but to actually see it in reality. So I'm fumbling around here, which you can't see in camera. Well, you can see part of it. Me trying to get rags ready and whatever. I'm just going to use a bit of black paint, poster paint really, for this. If we start off with a flat, crisp edge brush, fairly broad. It's a synthetic brush, so it's fairly soft. I'm going to dip that in the paint, and let's see what we get. We will, of course, get a crisp edge. As soon as I put that down, that edge is fairly crisp because it's flat. Seems childlike, almost simplicity, but you can see one of the reasons for that is that if I turn the brush around and come back this way, it's a bit easier to get crisp edges to things, or you can see, that when I'm creating our little blocks, so suggesting houses and whatever, it doesn't really matter, but the mark is quite specific. If we turn it on its edge, we will of course get a nice slim thin mark, because we're only like a razor blade, we're only touching the sharp edge. You can see there as I turn it gets broader because the brush changes direction and it slowly becomes thicker as we sweep. So you get these really quite nice gestures there. If I do that like a J shape and so on. So you can create very graceful shapes with the sweep of one brush, or one sweep of a brush if you like. And of course, like all brushes, you can imprint with it. So if I imprint the thin side, as it were, you can see, I hope, and just the way the brush is at the moment, the fibers happen to be splayed out a little bit, so they're making these odd little marks like ducks or something. But I can learn to make that work for me into perhaps trees or whatever it is. And it's the brush is doing that for me. I'm not trying to fill in a tree. So that's just one brush, and this brush is obviously capable of probably a lot more than that, but we're going to move on. We take a thinner flat brush, so it's obviously going to behave in a similar way, but one of the things about it is it's a slightly softer brush, but being a thinner mark, I can of course create straight lines with it. One of the things is with a flat brush, if I put my hand on and rest it, I'm pressing gently, and if I let the brush keep resting, you'll see there, as long as there's paint on it, it will create quite an even mark. I mean, that's quite a decent uh, line there with two straight edges. What I haven't done is try to fill in two edges. So if I could try that again and fill in the brush up. So I just put the brush down. Then I have to relax it down. I need to rest it fully and then drag that brush. And it will continue until the paint runs out. But even when it does, that's interesting too. But look at the nice shape that I've got. If I don't do that, if I keep my brush up high and don't relax it down, so in other words, if you see it sideways, or if I put the brush like that, what I want to do is rest it. You see me pushing it down and that's why I'm getting that nice crisp edge. If I try to hold it upright, my hand will shake. It's it's more difficult. You can see perhaps as I'm dragging that along, there's a little bit more of an agitation there along the sides, whereas that was even because it was almost like an imprint is what I'm doing here. So and likewise the edge of it and so on can be used for thinner marks and imprints like the previous one, but that is a useful way to create fairly even thick lines. It is a physical thing too. Obviously you got to get used to that idea of how you push the brush down and stay relaxed. If you don't do it a lot, then your muscles aren't used to this activity, so you are a bit shaky. Your muscles aren't designed for certain, so you may not get a nice crisp shape right away. But if you do it all the time or a lot of the times, you'll find that will work for you. I think we've got enough space here to make a couple more things. Let's turn even to the round brush again. Round, you can see they're pointed at the end. You can see it there. Nice even point. If I put that in my paint, we know, I would assume, that if I make a mark here, you see it's thin because I'm only touching it with that little tip. If I do it again, and this time press and relax, press, relax, press, relax, we can create this lovely graceful sort of suggestion. Leaves perhaps, so press and relax. You've got this nice tuft. And you can practice this over and over again. Press and flick like that, and you get this nice teardrop shape, leaf shape, whatever you want to call it, petal shape. Because in theory, if I kept doing that, I could create a nice series of, floral type shapes, whatever. Like the other ones, I can keep it rested down and pull it across. I'll get a straight line, but not maybe with as much control as a square brush, which is understandable because that's not square, that's uneven. And so one of the beauties of the pointed or round brush is that variation. So if I go up here, thin, thick, up, down, thin, thick, up, down, push, relax, push, slowly relax, push, quickly relax. You can get all these sort of energetic gestures, very different to the blocks here that we got with a flat brush. But look, think about that. That could be waves, that could be a flower, that could be buildings, there's trees, there's something else there, there's geometric shapes, there's fences and all sorts of using the brush. If I said I want a fence, I want a nice crisp shape with this brush, of course my problem would be that I would have to say, okay, I want a nice straight line there, and then my hand, so I want a fence shape, so I'm painting it, and already it's a bit uneven because I'm painting with an uneven brush, and then I'll have to fill that in to make it look like a solid fence shape, whereas that was kind of ready-made, if you like. So the rounded brush can be a very interesting one too. Imprinting with a round brush, it may be even more interesting because if you see, it splays out in an uneven way. A flat brush will always splay out pretty flat, but this is kind of going in different directions. You can see as I'm doing that, you can probably hear the noise as well. So I can change direction, I can build up fur, foliage. Think about things. If I do it lightly, I'll get different marks. You can see, look at the little imprints I'm making here. Boom, 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 boom. Little even imprints, which can be used for something else. So that is at least some of what a round brush can do, and it is only some. I can flip this page over because I'm filling that up actually. And if I stay with the round brush, this is a bigger round brush, and it's also a hog hair brush, or it's a hard fibered brush, a bristle brush rather than the previous one, which is nylon and soft. So those of you certainly working with oils, acrylics may be using that, although watercolors can use them too. So if I go to this one, you can see what I've done here. I've put paint on it, and I'm taking paint off. So I deliberately don't want so much paint on this brush this time. This is a thick, you can see it there, bristly brush. So if I lightly drag this brush down, hopefully you can see, look, the bristles are making a grainy pattern, which is understandable because there are a lot of, almost like a little comb dragging down there. You see that? Because I didn't put too much paint on. So if I do it that way, and some of you maybe already know this, but very often the technique used for creating the sense of reflections on water and things like that. So you can pull that out of your brush when you need it, rather than trying to paint every single reflection. Let the brush do the work if you can. If I load the brush up with more paint, of course, it's going to give us a heavier mark. But even at that, a bristle brush has a tendency, you can see, to skip. But that can be used to good account. You can work it in and say, no, I want that to be solid, that's okay. But if you take the pressure off, there's hard pressure, solid, slightly less pressure, very little pressure. Look at the different marks that I get simply because I'm leaning with different pressures with this same brush. And also, like the other brushes, it imprints, of course, you can see there. But because it is a bristle hard brush, it doesn't give way so easily. So the imprints are more defined. You see that? You can build up some lovely surfaces with an imprint. And you can go on, I suppose you could say, well, there's a tree there, so you can create all this sort of thing as well with a bristle brush. And with all brushes, another little thing some people do is roll the brush. It's not something that's probably used that much, but if you actually experiment, lay the brush down and twirl it. Maybe you need two hands for this, but twirl it all the way like a roller. There's a nice line of trees in the distance there, and that does the trick for you. Then that's good. So there's another series of marks with the bristle brush. I actually have here a couple more just finished with it, because there's so many variations in this, really, but here is a little brush you maybe have seen. Some of you might have one of these. It's cut at a sort of 45-degree angle, essentially designed to help you paint up in the corners. So if I make an imprint like that, sorry, beg your pardon, you see that the edge of that is at 45 degrees. So if I then turn it, then I get a 45 degree that way. I'll do that again because I'm standing up. I'll need a steadier hand for this. So let's do that. Flip the brush around, just turn it over. Almost like if you've ever created a miter in a cutting wood or whatever. But if you have something, for instance, like painted there, this is a bit crude, but you have something with a very angular shape and you want to try and paint up to the edge, but you don't want to disturb it. Because this is cut, you can come up into that corner without, and then pull away from the other way. So from the corner out with this brush, it allows you not to necessarily disturb the actual corner of a complicated shape. Okay, so that's the purpose of those. But in saying that, they're quite nice. They're a nice thing for creating a lovely fine line. You can see they're very often very thin, they're cut, you can see here, like a very narrow razor blade, very thin when you pull them together. So therefore, when you hold them up on their edge, they make a lovely line, okay? So, and they can do other things. You know, you'll find out by experimentation. And finally, there's an old brush. I was talking about old brushes that are seemingly useless or seemingly have had better days. And this is one of the cheapest brushes. I don't know where I got it. It's probably some set I've had just for backup brush. Really, really cheap and a terrible brush in terms of art quality. But I'm going to dip it in the thing. You can see. Actually, I don't know if you can see there, but this is all the hair that came out of that brush when I was showing you it there. Look at that. It's crazy. But just to show you that, you know, the oddest of things with apparently no use can create uneven, lovely organic marks. You know, your fingers can make great marks, your thumb, so why not a dodgy old brush? But don't get brushes like this where the hair comes out. Okay, so that's a free tip, if you like. So there's a few things that brushes can do. Think about that and make use of it. What we're going to look at in a moment is the way we stand in front of our paper or canvas or whatever it is, okay? So we'll move on to that next. So one of the things that I've been pushing really is this idea that not only the marks you make with a brush, but where you position yourself with the brush in terms in relation to your surface, okay? And a lot of people still have a habit of staying the same distance from the surface all the time, no matter what they're drawing or painting for that matter. They stay, and hopefully this camera picked it, they stay about this sort of distance, and everything in the world is painted at about, you know, an 8-inch or, you know, no more than 30 centimeter distance. And therefore, basically, if you think about it, you can move a brush in many ways. You can move it this way. You can see that moving in my hands. I'm not moving any other part of my arm here at the moment. You can't see it, but that's it. So the biggest habit I find with people is they draw everything from this distance, and you can see, you'll not see any movement in my arm because I'm doing this with my fingers. So everything's limited to that sort of gesture. If we realize that we can move our wrist, if we want to, we can get back a little bit and move our wrist around. We can move our elbow around a wee bit further, and we can move from the shoulder. You can maybe just see that. You can move, lock out your arm with the whole shoulder. So you have this ability to make all of these different marks. And they each will have its own quality. So I have a little round brush in my hand here. And of course, if I go in, as I'm saying, yes, it can be useful because I can make very intricate little marks. And I don't know whether they're hopefully showing up in the camera here, but little, you know, I can make little fast gestures with my finger movement. And I suppose if I put some more paint on here, I can go back and use the wrist. So if you can see I'm trying to make the wrist the movement. Look at the different gesture, the flowing quality that maybe is different from the first one. And then of course, and this is where I'll maybe use this bigger sheet of paper here so that we can see that to this one. And we'll change the brush just to this flat, broader brush. So if I get right back, you probably put me right out of shot, but that's maybe not a bad thing. And I'm locked my arms out, okay? So I want you to see that I can sweep the entire, size of this piece of paper. So I can make gestures like this and that, and they're lovely sweeping, and they're even because I'm using my shoulder as a rotation, as an axis, if you like, a bit like a pair of compasses, my shoulder. And that's why people look at the work of the Leonardo da Vinci and look at how they got how they do those circles, and yes, they were masters. That's one reason, that's the reason, but how did he get those little perfect curves and everything? Well, if you look at this, you can see that they're really nice, neat shapes. And it's not because I'm particularly like Leonardo, although I'd like to think I was sometimes, but but it's because I'm using the physical element in my body. So I'm going to try this again. I'm gonna be right on top, but you can see that I'm moving from my shoulder, okay, and to some extent a wee bit. You can see my shoulder and my wrist. You see that? So don't know. It's going to be on top of all these other things. But if I rotate that and rotate that, you can see that that's not a bad circle. That's a reasonable circle. It's not a perfect circle, but it's fairly even, and that's because I used the physical thing. If I tried to do the same like this, I'll do it inside here. If I tried to draw this circle, every little shake of my hand, and this is what a lot of people do and they get frustrated, and the chances are already it's kind of off. It's not great. Whereas if I use the axis of one of my joints, wrist or whatever, if I use that and flow round like that and round like that, you can see that it's much more even. It's a bit off, but it's better than it would have been. And that is one of the, when we draw and we're drawing apples or oranges, if we get up, like they're not going to be circular or the way we want. Whereas if we use the gestures, get the distance right, then that will be fine. The same with straight lines. If I move back again and use my working from the shoulder, I'm more chance of getting a fairly straight gesture because I'm locked. I've locked all the muscles in the arm except the shoulder. The only thing, I'm not allowing any movement, so therefore the shoulder is the only axis that I have. Likewise, if I lock out and just move across, it will be more likely to be a straight line or straighter line than if I get up here and shakily try to get across, because all my muscles are all trying to move at the same time. I've cramped myself up. Whereas if I lock out, that is a solid area. You can see that there. So this is the most exercise I've had for ages, actually, for the arms, you know. But hopefully thinking about that will help. Now, while we'll have this on, I know it's a bit scrappy, but the other thing is when we come to shade things with brushes, that again, if we step back a little bit, we can create. So I can create nice. What I'm doing here is pretty much from the shoulder and there. I've locked this out this time, so I'm moving that way because it's quite a big mark. And I'm creating diagonal sort of shading as if I was using a piece of charcoal, and I'm keeping it fairly even. It's nice and diagonal, you know. So the same with, so we can shade with a brush back and forward, very dark. We remember what we did earlier about, you know, the taking paint off. So if we look at this little area down here, with less paint, I can create shading which is slightly paler than this because of the pressure. You know, I'm not putting so much pressure on it. Even if I scrub it a wee bit more boldly, you can see there that the paint's a wee bit thinner. So we can create different tones as well. We can actually, just by using one color black, we can still create different tones by, you know, varying the pressure. You can see there, and it works better actually with the hog hair, what I call hog hair, the bristle brush, which I'm going to show you now, because it holds paint for longer. So if I was to take, I don't know, hopefully you can see maybe this area up here. You can see as I rub that, I'll do a wee bit more here. You can see that graininess happening in the hog hair or the bristle brush and creating these surfaces and so on. So it gives you a better variety than just a big solid thing that you get with a soft brush. So loads of things that you can do and make with brushes, and the way you physically hold them, the pressure you put on them, and the size and shape of the brush themselves. So what we're going to be doing is it's practicing these variations of those things, okay? What I'm going to do is have a look at this little box that I've placed in front of me. You'll hopefully see that in the corner of your screen as you're watching this, because I couldn't organize the camera to have both things, unfortunately. But I'm drawing it this time with you can see there the big flat brush that we looked at earlier and with the sharp edge, because it's an angular brush, it's an angular subject matter. And the other thing that I'm doing is I'm working at arm's length. So I'm standing up as I'm speaking to you. I'm standing at arm's length to the paper that I'm working on. What I've got on the brush is quite watery paint at the moment, because then it'll make a paler line and I'm not making big black lines too early on. I'm not going to get obsessed about measurements and so on this time around, simply because I would like you to see how I'm painting or drawing with the brush, and the marks that the brush make, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by looking at the front corner here. So the thing about the flat brush is if I lean forward and just do that, it makes it a nice, fairly straight line right away because of the nature of the brush. So that means that in that case, if I'm thinking in those terms, I can then get the angles of the proportion of the perspective using the same method. So I can look at my subject, have a think about what I'm seeing, and what I'm doing is, as I'm speaking to you, you'll see my hand maybe in shot a wee bit, but I'm rotating the brush to the angle that I believe the line's running. I'm bringing it over and I'm just bringing it to the paper and making a line there, a mark there. And you can see it's running slightly. And then I'm going to rotate it around until I see this line. And I'm bringing it over and making a, sorry, beg your pardon, making a little imprint right there and let that run up that way. So the flatness of the brush, you can see there, makes a flat line. So it gives me some sort of a guideline, okay? Well, what I'll do is, if I make a vertical line here slowly, arm's length, it will be fairly neat, crisp and so on. And I can make another mark there, indicating that running back there. I can make another mark somewhere like this, indicating the direction there. So I can say, okay, well, I maybe want that line coming back here. I want that line running back that way. We've got to decide how far that goes in a moment. This way, we're going across ever so slightly upwards, not very much. And the same with that, running that way. And then we'll let that drop sort of right there, okay? So you can see the crispness of the lines there. And we can work around, we can decide, okay, where do I want the back corner to be. So it's somewhere probably about there. We'll let that back corner, the angle of that, sweep across that way. So we're getting this sort of, and look, I'm making several lines until I kind of feel happier about it, if you know what I mean. And then I can decide, okay, well, let's see how far back we go there, because that is going to go slightly at a downward angle as I'm seeing it there. It's going to follow that there a wee bit, and we can create. So you can see that my gesture with the brush is giving me those crisp lines, you know, straight sweep. It's a wee bit shallow, straight sweep there, straight sweep there. We can create the inside part of the box and so on. And then we can lightly just scratch over that to indicate the first suggestions of tone. Likewise, we'll just put in, actually that there, that should be a bit further over really, but that back end, and again we know that that is in shadow. So we can use the flat edge of the brush to create the tonal thing. So this is beginning to help us see it more solidly, more three-dimensional. And then we can, if we want, we can begin to increase tone, because I know that the underneath, it's sitting on a little table, and that little table is dark. So we can begin to fill that in there, block that in, block this in, which will lift that forward. Likewise the background, and then we can begin to darken that in. So I'm actually not using white paint because now I'm just realized that's darker than that. So I can maybe say, okay, let's do that. Let's just make a wash across that, get that up into the corner, there and there, and make that deeper. So the drawing, the form is being created by a brush, and we're painting right away, you know. We're beginning to create a painting without colour. And I suppose you could say drawing with a brush, that's what it is, you know. But it's about the gestures. So this is a hard angular thing. So I'm using a hard angular brush, and I'm using crisp gestures by standing further back. I'm just deliberately making this background a wee bit darker just to see how that changes things there. Look. So you can use the flat side of the brush to get big areas. Sorry, beg your pardon. Tape there. And maybe just that, so we create a crisp line there, a bit more paint. I know it's not so dark behind it, but just wanted to do this to show you. So we can block in and we can line. So we have lines and blocks like that with this brush. And we can begin to see some sort of form being created, and then we can develop that into painting or whatever. Now what I would like to do then is have a look at something that's not hard and angular but organic and natural and doesn't have maybe such a crisp geometric form. Now the next sort of drawing I want to do really is something that isn't geometric and flat and neat, but is in fact organic and natural. It's going to be an old dried up leaf, okay? So we want to get the characteristics of that. And that's the nature of painting. So if you draw in that way, your paintings are more likely to be like that. So what I'm going to use, I have here, maybe you can see there a round, very soft nylon brush, which has a little point to it. So it's, you know, it's a round, finer brush. I've dug out also another round brush, but this is actually a hog hair brush with harsh fibers in it. Okay, so it's going to make a different mark. I don't know if it's possible to see when we look at the camera. They're probably not sort of focus, but the head of it is very hard. You know, it doesn't come to a nice gentle point the way the other one does. Then this one I may or may not use, but I thought I'd bring it out anyway. It's a bigger rounded brush. Okay, so it is similar to the one I've just shown you, but again, bristles rather than nylon. So it's certainly more harsh, and you can maybe see the tip of that there is very broad. It doesn't come to a point, so it might be useful for some things. And finally, a little brush here that's been around for a while. It is a nylon brush, but you can see hopefully it's out of shape, and it's kind of been battered over the months, but it makes interesting marks. So we'll see what happens to that with just that little selection. So what you notice actually is pretty much all of them are rounded brushes. Now that's not essential, but it's just I wanted to make a change from the flat angular brush, which was a flat angular object previously, a box. Now we're going to go with something that doesn't have a set form, if you like. So I'm going to set up here and get started on this and show you what I mean. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing here in terms of the screen. So I've set up the camera as wide an angle as I can. But what I want to do is simply, and hopefully you're able to see the image that I'm working from, which is this leaf. I'm just using, to begin with, the soft pointed round brush, nylon brush. And one of the things is you can see that it makes a very thin line, and it can make a thicker line with the point that's actually on it. So I'm loading some it's just black paint really, and what I'm going to do is think about the edges of the subject, because what I notice are that they are uneven. So I'm making marks. You can see already that the nature of the marks I'm making with the end of the brush, because the brush in a sense, is only able to do what the shape will allow it. And as I say, don't, hopefully the proportions of this will be reasonable. But again, what I'm trying to do is point out that in the early stages here, by using a particular type of a brush in a certain type of way, I can create some sense of the nature of the object. So yes, it is broken up and edgy, literally. There's a little curly bit over here. But you see the way I'm moving my hand? I'm trying to move my hand in a way that creates the sense of the brokenness of this dried object. It's coming out there. There's another bit here. As I say, I haven't taken loads of time over measuring the accuracy of the proportions, but what I really want is you to see this. Even already, I hope what you're seeing is, and there's a little stem coming out there, that agitated line immediately tells us that this object is something that's not like the box, that there's something else going on, that it is natural, that it is of a certain type, if you like. And we can go in there. I'm just noticing there's a little bit of a fold over there. The thing's folded over, and likewise there's a little bit of fold here. And at the moment it's all about line. I'm not really thinking of dark and light or shading or any of that sort of stuff. And even with this little brush, I'm loading it with finish paint, and I might say, well, let's create a don't press very hard here. I'm just up on the tip of that pointy brush there to suggest some of these little lines, And I'm trying my best not to pressurize the thing, because if I press, the line broadens out, as you know. Again, I'm sure I'm not getting these lines exactly as they are, but you can see now there's a little bit more information about the middle of the leaf going in there. And the leaf has been battered around, and as the more I look at it, the more I realize, the qualities in there. And we can start off with that, which is an outline and a kind of to some extent, a wee bit of veins in there. And then I could move to some of these other brushes. So, I'll just try that. I may or may not use them all. Actually, what I want to use is this little one that I talked about, very stubby, broken up one, the one that's a bit dry and has seen better days. Because if I put it in the paint, and if you can see up here, you can see if I imprint it, it makes an odd mark. It doesn't make a very neat line, or because it's splayed out. But in saying that, it allows me perhaps to think about saying, okay, let's get some of the shadowy areas in here. Let's maybe take a lot of paint off it. So you can see there's not much paint on there, but because it's an oddball, sort of a little brush, it's making these battered looking marks. And there's a bit of shadow, I notice, going down that way. So I can put the shadow on this way, we're rubbing it, and I'm beginning to perhaps suggest the texture that's inside the leaf as well. It's just a few marks. It's an interpretation. Of course it's not the same as every single mark that's on the photograph you're hopefully seeing, but what it is are, I should say, marks that make a statement that say, yeah, there's something rough. That's something that's not perfect and neat and clean and all of that. And you can see as I'm rubbing that what's happening, and that shadowy bit goes way up here, look, And as a painter, if I'm preparing to paint a leaf and I want this characteristic of it being dry and old and battered, this is starting to give me it. So when I get into color and all the rest, if I keep making these marks with my brush the same way, I'm bound to be closer than if I was filling in every little block as if it was a little color by numbers exercise, which sometimes we do that, I'm looking at the other brushes here, I'm just, for a bit of fun, there's that big brush I mentioned there earlier. I don't know how well you can see that big broad bristle brush. So let's dip it in the paint. And obviously when I stipple it, you can see it's going to make textures because I'm hitting it with the point of the brush. And maybe I can say, okay, well, what if I add that into some of this? What if I add some, because there are bits of this leaf that seem to have little spots that it's picked up, maybe disease or something like that. And you can see, I get carried away with this and do the whole thing perhaps. This is lighter in the middle, I've just noticed there, But it's another form of a mark that we can make. What I might do, just as a matter of interest actually, but something I preach, sometimes I need to practice. Think about that background. I'm using that big bristle brush again. You can hear it nice and bold around the outsides of that, Let's see what happens when I blot in. Look at the boldness that I'm trying to have with the brush, because you're a painter. We're not people who colour in. At least that's my philosophy. And as I block in that, you can see the leaf coming away. The light bits are more obvious because it is on a darker background, But let the paint be as bold as that. If you were painting this is the way you would be starting. And watch the wrist action. It's the same as what I did with the circles. Use the axis of the joint that you're using, and that's what's giving me these different marks, because I'm rotating my hand in certain ways. I'm not putting the paint on the same way every time like that. Let's fill that in. I'm rubbing that in and getting it in quickly and saying, okay, let's see what we've got. And it feels like a painting from day one. You can see hopefully this leaf form coming out of that. And we can go on to develop that. I'm not using white paint at the minute or grey. It's just black and white. So obviously, there's a certain limitation. But even with this same brush, there's very little paint left on it. What I'll do is I'll just rub and rub hard over that area I've just done. You see how it's washing it in the shadow? I'm labouring here to get the last of the brush, but it's just pushing that down a wee bit more. So the dilution of the paint, or the thinness, the amount you put on, that's watered a wee bit. You can see there's a wee bit of water in there, just to take that pure whiteness off as well. So that's allowing these light bits to get a little bit bolder. And I'm still on that big brush, It's an often ignored quality that big brushes can often give you more, let's say, accuracy than a little fiddly small brush. But you see, what we've done is we've moved from that pointed brush that we used earlier on that created these nice little lines. Hopefully you can see that. If I'm really delicate, I can get a really, really, really thin line there. And we move to this big brush, which is giving us the shadows. Even the fine line brush, if I was to push it, that was the brush I did those lovely lines with. But if I push it hard and spread out the fibres at the end, it's a different sort of thing again. But you can see the quality, I hope, that is very different from what we got in our box drawing. Now, one of the one of the other factors in drawing with brushes can be the paint itself that you use, or the ink, or whatever it is you're actually using, the dilution of that. And what I mean here is, if I can just take one of the brushes here, you'll see what I mean. If I take, as I have been doing, just fairly straightforward dark paint, black really, and this is a round soft brush here, and I want to draw something, let's say this sort of leaf shape here, okay, and I want variation in tone. Well, obviously at the moment what I've got is black paint, and every time I touch it, it's going to be pretty much black. So if I'm drawing or sketching, what I can do is, if I remove certain amounts of the paint off the brush, you can see there's, as I draw, I can rub less paint on. And you can practice this sort of a idea. You can see here, if I take this and say this is a darker side of the leaf, and I want to work it across here. And this is sort of a sketching technique, if you like. But you can see that as I rub away the paint, the little textural areas that I leave with the brush can suggest light to dark. You can sort of see a blending going on there. And sometimes if you put a little more paint on your brush, which I've just done, I've applied some more black paint, gone back into the dark area, put that on, clean the brush slightly, and with the wet dark paint that's left, drag it over until you practically run out of paint. So I can create something of an illusion of a light and shade only with black paint and only with this particular one brush. I'm not introducing white. Of course I could introduce white paint and mix it and make various different shades of greys, and of course I'll have the illusion of light and shade. But as a practicing thing, it's very important, I think, to get the feeling of what can you do with a brush and paint before you necessarily go down that line. Look at the marks that the brush are making and look at the possibilities of those marks. And you don't see those unless you do this sort of thing. So you can see that I could be studying outside or studying something in a still life, and I can be drawing it like this. I don't need to necessarily get into full scale greys and colors and whatever. And this is a good question, where does drawing with a brush end and just painting begin? And maybe there is no borderline. But what is important to me is not to see drawing, as it were, with a brush and painting as two separate things. Drawing is something you don't necessarily do and then colour in. So we draw lines and then we colour in. What I'm doing here from the very start is painting, but I'm painting to create light and shade or shape or tone or all of the things we do in drawing, but with paint, not with pencil first, coloured in. And hopefully that makes some sense. The second element is, as I say, dilution of paint. So this was pretty much thick black paint, which is going to rub to create the illusion. But of course, what I can do, if I can just clean the brush up a wee bit here and take a similar sort of shape here, same idea, okay, leaf shape, all right, just a random leaf shape in the black paint. But of course, this time, what I can do is say, okay, I'll have the black or the dark side of the leaf here. And of course, then just simply clean the brush. And now we are getting blurring the lines between what we call painting and what we call drawing. Because what I'm doing now is just water. I've just cleaned the brush. There's just a little bit of water left in the brush. And while that paint is still wet, I can wipe the brush and rub the dregs of the water across, merging one to the other. And you can see again, I'm creating some sense of going from light to dark simply by diluting the paint. And those of you who may be involved with watercolor know this is really essentially what we're doing. We're not using white, we're using the water to create light. But there are two ways to suggest light and shade. One is with the paint itself, by physically rubbing it. One is by diluting the paint. And as you know, with watercolors and other paints, if you're fast enough before it dries, you can wipe some of that back and make it lighter. I think that's probably dried out pretty much because it's very absorbent. So we can vary and draw with dilution. What I'm going to do here is even just as a matter of interest, let's create some lines in this leaf. Okay, I'm just inventing this, but look at the marks. This is a smaller brush, by the way, smaller, soft, round brush. I'm just going to could use other brushes that would just make a different type of mark. And you can see there that I'm creating, I'm moving my hand to see what marks I can make with this tool, this brush here. And then wiping the brush, because there's quite a lot of wet paint on there. And I can rub in maybe some bits, maybe make some of those darker on this side, lighter on that side. And you can see that the lines disappear into the shadows on the right hand side, and not so much on the left hand side here, and we're creating this more information, if you like, but yet not with other colors, not with white, but with the marks of the brush itself. One more factor in this procedure is the surface you draw on, or paint on, whatever you want to call it. What we've just done with this little exercise was work on just ordinary cartridge paper. This is a little piece of canvas here, fairly rough. You can hear, I hope, the scratching mark. So it has that canvas surface, slightly like sandpaper, I suppose. And that's the way it's going to pick up the paint, unlike the smooth white paper where the paint skidded across there. What I'm using here is really quite a stiff, I don't know if you can see that, it's a very stiff, there's little movement in that, very short, stubby, stiff bristle brush. So it's really hard. You can see there I'm really having to work to bend that amongst the paint all over my hands as well. But if I put a little bit of black paint on there and start to work that in, just use it and wipe some paint off there, you can see, for example, if I wipe or rub lightly, so I'm not pressing very hard, I will of course get a light mark. If I rub hard, I'll get a darker mark, as long as I've got some paint on the brush. So for example, if I let's create a circle or rounded shape here. Okay, no, not great, but that'll do. And what I'm going to do is vary the tones here. So all I'm doing is, for example, here with more paint and hard rubbing, I'm going to get darker tones, and if I have to, reach across, get some more paint on there. So it's fairly solid and hard because there's plenty of paint and plenty of pressure on this side. Then if I don't put any more paint on for now, at least, now I'm going to run out of paint because the paint's coming off the brush all the time, but if I really rub, the sandpapery quality of the canvas is picking that up, and it's gripping the paint much better than a smooth piece of paper ever would. And therefore you can see, as I keep rubbing and maybe taking the pressure off, it's getting lighter and lighter. Over here I might decide is very hardly any rubbing at all, and then I'm rubbing a bit harder. Yes, there comes a time when I maybe have to reload the brush a bit, but you can see that what I can do is by pressing hard and lightly, I will get variations of light and shade. So I can create the illusion, in this case, of a ball or an orange or a whatever. And that depends on the pressure of my hand and the surface, this gritty surface. You can actually see it there. And it's a lovely way actually to model things, to create solid forms, the illusion of solid spheres and even cubes and things. You can see I'm just going for making the darker there near the bottom and trying to rub some paint off and get a sort of a mid-tone going on here. It's a bit like charcoal really, it feels like charcoal. So you have dark, medium, light, and you can see that we're creating this illusion all through the, as I say, the working of the brush. We're not involved in grey paint, and I'm putting a bit of shadow in there just underneath there, quite a dark, and then I'll maybe put a bit of a lighter tone. I think this is what they used to call the penumbra, umber and penumbra. I vaguely remember at school something to do with that, but you can see this illusion all with that very stiff brush, because the stiff brush pushes and stands up against the canvas. If I use, for example, that little brush I was using a moment ago, this soft rounded brush, work up here, you can see it's kind of harder because it's collapsing below the pressure. If I work it, yes, I can get it to do what I want. Okay, it just takes a lot more work, whereas this stiff brush, there's more control with it. Okay, so that's the difference. Different tool, different surface, different pressure on the tool, And that allows us to draw from the very beginning with paint. So we're not colouring in shapes that we've previously drawn. We're modelling it like a piece of clay from the very beginning.
I hope that that little preview that you've just seen there, those little demos, have just reinforced what I'm trying to get across to you with regards to a workshop and drawing with brushes. Okay, brush is just not the same every time, and sometimes we have a habit of using it the same every time. Whatever shape or size it is, we tend to move it just like we moved it maybe when we're younger in school or whatever. I don't know. But there are certain factors we must vary. One of them is the tool itself, the brush itself. Okay, you've seen there, they can be big, small, the big harsh bristle brushes, scratchy if you like, soft, delicate nylon brushes or sable or whatever, pointed brushes, flat brushes, rounded brushes, brushes that are distorted because they're just old, brushes that have hardened up, that scratch. They all make different marks. That's important. So the choice of tool is critical. The gesture, second thing, the gesture you make with your hand. You saw me rotating my arm around the shoulder, the wrist. It can be a fast, short gesture. It can be a slow, large, big gesture. And that matches the subject matter. Don't use the same gesture every time. If you're drawing, that's all you know how to do. You can move your hand or your arms whatever way you want. The pressure you put on the brush, do you press hard and rub hard? You rest the brush just delicately? You let the brush trickle down the paper, or do you push it into the paper or the canvas, whatever? And perhaps another one we could add to that is dilution of the paint itself that we use. Is it thick, lumpy paint, or is it thin, watery, dribbly paint? Because that will obviously behave differently in a brush. And there are many other variables probably, including the paper or the canvas itself. If the canvas is rough, then the mark you make will have broken bits. If it's smooth, then it'll make a different mark. The surface you paint on, of course, varies that. So I want you to be aware of all that, but not only be aware of it, but practice that. Break out of the habits you might think you have in the way you make marks with a brush. And if you do that, you broaden your vocabulary, you get a wider range of possibilities. And then when you paint, you will make paintings that are much more confident and painterly, as the term sometimes is. Which is what we often wonder about. We often look at, how did that person get that lovely painting? How did they get that lovely free? The reason is what we've just been looking at there, basically. Whereas those who end up always just colouring into that flower and colouring in that sheep or colouring in the tree in the same way will always make the same sort of paintings, and you'll be frustrated. Okay, so I'll not finish on a negative point. The positive point is you can change that by practicing all of the things that I've suggested. Okay.